I never planned to become the villain of my own family. I never woke up one morning and decided that I would betray the person who had loved me longest, protected me fiercest, and trusted me most completely. My sister Emma was all of those things to me. She was my defender when we were children, my confidant when we were teenagers, and my closest friend when we became adults. And I destroyed her in a single night. What I did cannot be undone. The words I'm about to speak cannot be unspoken. And the guilt I carry is not something that fades with time or therapy or distance. It lives in me like a second heartbeat, always present, always reminding me of who I really am when no one is watching. This is my confession, not because I deserve forgiveness, not because I expect sympathy, but because the weight of silence has become heavier than the weight of truth. And maybe, just maybe, if I say it all out loud, I can finally stop running from the person I became on the night before my sister's wedding. Emma was 3 years older than me, and for as long as I can remember, she was everything I wanted to be. She was confident without being arrogant. She was beautiful without being vain. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they mattered, like she saw them, really saw them, in a way that most people never bother to try. I was the opposite. I was the quiet one, the awkward one, the one who stood in corners at parties and hoped no one would notice me. Where Emma glowed, I faded. Where she succeeded, I stumbled. And the worst part was that she never made me feel less than her. She never lorded her achievements over me or pointed out my failures. She simply existed in her light, and I existed in her shadow, and somehow that made it worse. Because if she had been cruel, I could have hated her. I could have justified what I did later by pointing to some wound she had inflicted, some slight she had committed. But Emma was kind. She was generous. She was the sister who drove 2 hours in a snowstorm to be with me when my first serious boyfriend broke up with me. She was the one who loaned me money when I lost my job and never once asked for it back. She was the one who called me every Sunday, without fail, just to check in, just to make sure I was okay. And I repaid her by sleeping with the man she was about to marry. His name was Daniel Reed. He was 34 when I met him, a financial consultant with a firm in the city. He had dark hair, green eyes, and a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. Emma brought him home for Christmas dinner 3 years ago, and I remember the exact moment I saw him for the first time. He was standing in our parents' living room, wearing a navy sweater and holding a bottle of wine he had brought as a gift. He looked up when I walked in, and something in his expression shifted. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but I caught it. A flicker of interest, a moment of assessment. And then it was gone, replaced by the polite smile of a man meeting his girlfriend's family for the first time. I told myself I imagined it. I told myself I was projecting my own loneliness onto a stranger who was simply being friendly. But somewhere deep inside, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I felt something stir. Something dangerous. Something I should have killed right then and there. But I didn't. The first year of their relationship, I kept my distance. I was polite when we were together at family gatherings, friendly but not overly so. I asked him the appropriate questions about his work, his hobbies, his plans for the future. I watched the way he looked at my sister, the way he touched her arm when he spoke to her, the way he laughed at her jokes even when they weren't particularly funny, and I told myself that I was happy for her, that she deserved this, that he was exactly the kind of man she should be with. But envy is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you all at once. It seeps into your bloodstream gradually, drop by drop, until one day you wake up and realize that you've been sick for longer than you knew. It started with small thoughts, harmless observations that I dismissed as quickly as they came. I noticed that Daniel always seemed to find a reason to stand near me at parties. I noticed that his hugs lasted a beat longer than necessary. I noticed that when he looked at me, there was something in his eyes that wasn't there when he looked at Emma. A curiosity, a question. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wanted so badly to be seen, to be wanted, that I was manufacturing signals that didn't exist. That's what I told myself for months. That's what I repeated like a mantra every time my thoughts drifted somewhere they shouldn't go. But then came the engagement party. It was held at our parents' house, a casual gathering of close friends and family to celebrate Emma and Daniel's decision to spend their lives together. I wore a simple black dress, nothing flashy, nothing that would draw attention. I stood in the kitchen most of the night, helping my mother with the food, avoiding the living room where Emma was showing off her ring to anyone who would look. Daniel found me there around 10 o'clock. I was washing dishes at the sink, my hands covered in soapy water, when I heard his voice behind me. Hiding from the crowd? I turned to find him leaning against the door frame, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was smiling that smile, the one that made you feel seen. Just helping out, I said, turning back to the dishes. Someone has to do the unglamorous work. He laughed softly and walked over to stand beside me. Emma's lucky to have you. She talks about you all the time, says you're the best sister she could have asked for. The words should have warmed me. Instead, they felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. She's easy to be good to, I said, keeping my voice even. She's easy to love. There was a pause. A beat too long. And then Daniel said something that changed everything. I think you're too hard on yourself, Claire. I think you're a lot more lovable than you realize. I turned to look at him, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt charged, electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. His eyes held mine, and in them I saw something I'd been looking for my entire life. Recognition. Not as Emma's little sister. Not as the awkward one, the quiet one, the one who faded into the background. He was looking at me like I was a person worth seeing, worth knowing, worth wanting. It lasted only a few seconds. Then Emma's voice called from the living room, and Daniel blinked, stepped back, and smiled his polite smile. Better get back to the party, he said. But it was nice talking to you, Claire. Really nice. He left, and I stood there at the sink with my hands in the water, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. That was the moment I should have stopped. That was the moment I should have recognized the danger and done everything in my power to avoid it. I should have limited my contact with Daniel. I should have confessed my confused feelings to a therapist, a friend, anyone who could have helped me see clearly. But I didn't. Instead, I replayed that conversation in my mind for weeks. I analyzed every word, every glance, every shift in his tone. I convinced myself that I'd imagined the connection, that it was just Daniel being friendly, that I was reading too much into a meaningless exchange. And then I saw him again. It was 3 months before the wedding. Emma was out of town for a work conference, and she asked me to stop by their apartment to water her plants. She gave me the key, trusting me completely, never suspecting that her trust was already misplaced. I let myself in on a Tuesday evening, expecting the apartment to be empty. Daniel was supposed to be at work. But when I walked into the living room, I found him sitting on the couch with a bottle of beer, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He looked up when he heard me, and for a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then he smiled, that same smile, and something inside me cracked open. Claire, I forgot Emma gave you a key. I'm sorry, and I said, already backing toward the door. I didn't mean to intrude. I'll come back another time. No, stay. He gestured to the chair across from him. I could use the company, actually. It's been a rough week. I should have left. Every instinct told me to leave, but I didn't. I sat down in the chair and I asked him what was wrong, and he started talking. He told me about the pressure at work, the expectations that were piling up, the feeling that he was performing a role that didn't quite fit him anymore. He talked about his father, who had died the year before, and how he still hadn't processed the grief. He talked about his fears for the future, his doubts about whether he was ready for the commitment of marriage. And I listened. I listened the way no one had ever listened to me. I gave him my full attention, my empathy, my understanding. I made him feel seen. When he finished talking, he looked at me with those green eyes and said, I've never told anyone that before, not even Emma. The words hit me like a wave. Not even Emma. He had chosen to share his deepest fears with me, not with the woman he was about to marry. And in that moment, I felt powerful for the first time in my life. I felt like I mattered. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But I was so hungry for that feeling that I couldn't let it go. We started texting after that night. Innocent messages at first, check ins about his stress at work, recommendations for books and podcasts that might help. Gradually, the messages became more frequent, more personal. He told me things he said he couldn't tell Emma. He asked me questions about my life that no one else bothered to ask. He made me feel like I existed. I told myself it was just friendship. I told myself that I was helping him, supporting him through a difficult time. I told myself that there was nothing inappropriate about two people connecting on an emotional level, but I was lying. To him, to Emma, and most of all to myself. The truth was that I had fallen in love with my sister's fiancé. The truth was that every text from him sent a thrill through my body. The truth was that I was counting down the days, not until the wedding, but until I would see him again. And he knew it. He had to know it. Because when I finally saw him next at a family dinner 2 months before the wedding, the look he gave me across the table was not the look of a man who saw me as his future sister-in-law. It was the look of a man who wanted something he couldn't have. I excused myself early that night, claiming a headache. I drove home with my hands shaking on the steering wheel, telling myself that this had to stop, that I had to end it before something irreversible happened. But I didn't end it. I couldn't. The connection between us had become like oxygen to me. I needed it to breathe. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a blur of final preparations and mounting dread. Emma was radiant, glowing with happiness, completely unaware of the betrayal that was building beneath the surface of her perfect life. She asked me to be her maid of honor, and I accepted with tears in my eyes that she mistook for joy. I stood beside her at her bridal shower, smiling and laughing and pretending that I wasn't dying inside. I helped her choose flowers and finalize seating charts and pick out the perfect shoes. I played the role of the devoted sister so convincingly that I almost believed it myself. But every night, I went home and stared at my phone, waiting for Daniel's name to appear. And every night, it did. His messages became more frequent, more intense. He told me he was confused. He told me he didn't know what he was feeling. He told me that when he was with Emma, he couldn't stop thinking about me. I should have shown those messages to someone. I should have confronted him, or her, or both of them. I should have done something, anything to stop the train that was barreling toward disaster. But I didn't. Because some sick, selfish part of me wanted this. Some broken part of me needed to believe that I could be chosen over Emma just once. That I could win, just this once. The rehearsal dinner was held on a Friday night at a restaurant downtown. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a venue outside the city, a beautiful estate with gardens. I sat at the table with the rest of the bridal party, watching my sister glow with happiness, watching Daniel play the part of the devoted groom. He gave a toast that brought tears to everyone's eyes. He talked about how lucky he was to have found Emma, how she had changed his life, how he couldn't wait to spend forever with her. And the whole time, his foot was pressed against mine under the table. After the dinner, everyone went their separate ways. The bride and groom were staying at a hotel near the venue, as was the rest of the bridal party. I had a room on the third floor alone. Emma hugged me goodnight in the lobby, telling me how grateful she was to have me as a sister. She couldn't imagine this day without me. "I love you, Claire," she said, her eyes shining. "You know that, right? No matter what happens, you're my person." I told her I loved her too, and I meant it. Even then, even standing on the edge of the abyss, I meant it. But love wasn't enough to save me from what I did next. I went to my room, changed out of my dress, and tried to sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of the evening, every glance Daniel had given me, every accidental touch that felt like fire on my skin. At midnight, my phone buzzed. It was him. The message was simple, just 2 words. "Can't sleep." I stared at those words for what felt like an eternity. I knew what they meant. I knew what he was asking without asking. And I knew that if I responded, there would be no going back. My fingers typed the reply before my brain could stop them. "Me neither." His response came seconds later. A room number. I sat on the edge of my bed, my whole body trembling. This was the moment. The fork in the road. I could stay where I was, delete the message, pretend it never happened. I could save my sister, save myself, save whatever was left of my integrity. Or I could go to him. I went to him. The walk from my room to his felt like miles, even though it was only 2 floors up. Every step was a decision. Every breath was a choice. And with each one, I felt myself sinking deeper into the person I'd never wanted to become. He opened the door before I could knock, like he had been waiting, like he knew I would come. We stood there in the doorway, looking at each other. Neither of us spoke. The words weren't necessary. We both knew why I was there. We both knew what was about to happen. He reached out and took my hand. His fingers were warm, steady. And when he pulled me inside and closed the door behind me, I let him. What happened next is something I have replayed in my mind 1,000 times. Every touch, every word, every moment of temporary madness that felt, in the darkness of that room, like the most real thing I had ever experienced. I told myself that he loved me, that this was different, that what we had was something rare and true, something that justified the destruction we were about to cause. I told myself that Emma would understand eventually, that she deserved to know the truth about the man she was marrying. But none of that was true. The truth was simpler, uglier. I was lonely and jealous, and so desperate to feel chosen that I was willing to burn everything down just to have one night in the spotlight. We didn't sleep. When the first gray light of morning crept through the curtains, I lay there beside him, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of what I had done settle over me like a funeral shroud. Daniel was silent. The connection that had felt so electric the night before now felt cold, distant. He wouldn't look at me. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. This was a mistake. The words cut through me like a blade. A mistake. That's what I was to him, a moment of weakness, a regret. I know, I said, because what else was there to say? I got dressed in silence. I walked to the door in silence. And just before I left, I turned to look at him one last time. What are we going to do, Hannah? I asked. He didn't answer. He just stared at the wall, his jaw tight, his eyes empty. And in that moment, I understood something that I had refused to see before. He was never going to choose me. He had never intended to choose me. I was a distraction, a fantasy, an escape from the reality of his own doubts. And now that the fantasy was over, I was nothing to him. I went back to my room, showered, and put on my maid of honor dress. I did my hair and makeup with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. And when I looked at myself in the mirror, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked normal, put together, like someone who hadn't just committed the ultimate betrayal against the person she loved most. But I knew the truth, and soon everyone else would too. The wedding ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon. The morning was a whirlwind of activity. Hair appointments, photographs, last-minute adjustments to the flower arrangements. Emma was everywhere, laughing, crying happy tears, radiating joy so pure it made me want to vomit. I moved through it all like a ghost. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I answered questions when I was asked. I played my role so perfectly that no one suspected anything was wrong. But inside, I was screaming. Every time I looked at Emma, I saw the sister who had loved me unconditionally my entire life. The sister who had dried my tears and celebrated my victories and never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. And now I had taken something from her that could never be given back. I had stolen her peace, her trust, her fairy tale ending. And for what? For one night with a man who couldn't even look at me the morning after, I thought about telling her. 100 times that morning, I opened my mouth to say the words, but every time fear stopped me. Fear of her reaction, fear of the consequences, fear of becoming the villain in a story I'd never meant to be a part of, so I said nothing. And the hours ticked by and the ceremony drew closer, and I let my sister walk toward the biggest mistake of her life, without a word of warning. The venue was stunning. Emma had dreamed of getting married there since she was a teenager, when she had seen it in a magazine and declared that one day she would stand in those gardens and promise forever to someone who deserved her. Daniel didn't deserve her. And neither did I. I stood at the front of the aisle holding my bouquet, watching as the guests filed in. Daniel stood at the altar looking handsome in his tuxedo, his face arranged in an expression of anticipation that I now knew was nothing but performance. He glanced at me once, just for a second, and in his eyes I saw something that looked like warning. Don't say anything. Don't ruin this. Let me have what I want. I looked away. The music started. The guests rose, and there at the end of the aisle was Emma, radiant in white, walking toward her future with our father at her side. She was so beautiful it hurt to look at her. Her smile was so genuine, so full of hope and love and trust. And as she walked past me, she reached out and squeezed my hand just for a moment. Love you, she whispered. I squeezed back. Love you too. And then she was past me, standing beside Daniel, ready to promise him everything. The ceremony was a blur. I heard the words, but they didn't register. I watched as they exchanged vows, as they slid rings onto each other's fingers, as they kissed to seal their union. I clapped when everyone else clapped. I smiled when everyone else smiled, but inside I was dying. The reception was held in a tent on the grounds, white linens and fairy lights and champagne flowing like water. I gave my maid of honor speech, somehow finding words that sounded loving and sincere, even though every syllable tasted like ash in my mouth. To Emma and Daniel, I said, raising my glass, may your love be as strong as the bond we share as sisters. The guests applauded. Emma cried happy tears, and I returned to my seat, feeling like the worst person who had ever lived. The night wore on. There was dancing and laughter and all the joy that should accompany the celebration of a love story. I drank too much champagne, trying to drown the guilt, but it only made it worse. Every smile felt like a lie. Every toast felt like a betrayal. Around 10 o'clock, I couldn't take it anymore. I slipped away from the reception and walked out into the gardens, where the night air was cool and the stars were bright and I could finally breathe. I stood by the lake staring at my reflection in the dark water, wondering how I had become this person, wondering if there was any way back from what I had done. That's when Emma found me. There you are, she said, walking up beside me. I've been looking for you. You okay? I didn't turn to face her. I couldn't. Fine, I said. Just needed some air. She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and put her arm around me, pulling me close. Thank you, Claire. For everything. For being here, for being my sister, for being my person. I couldn't have done this without you. The words broke something inside me. Something that had been holding on by a thread finally snapped, and before I could stop them, tears were streaming down my face. Hey, Emma said, turning me to face her. What's wrong? What happened? I wanted to lie. I wanted to brush it off, blame it on the champagne, tell her I was just emotional about her big day. That's what I should have done. That's what a better person would have done. But the guilt was too heavy. The secret was too dark. And in that moment, standing under the stars with my sister's concerned eyes searching my face, I broke. I did something terrible, I whispered. Something unforgivable. Emma's brow furrowed. What are you talking about, Claire? You're scaring me. And then I told her. All of it. The texts, the emotional connection, the night before the wedding. I told her about Daniel's room, about what we had done, about the shame that had been eating me alive since the moment I walked through his door. I watched her face change as the words sank in. Confusion gave way to disbelief. Disbelief gave way to horror. And horror gave way to something I had never seen in my sister's eyes before, devastation. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen, like I had reached into her chest and ripped out her heart. You're lying, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. This is some kind of sick joke. I wish it was, I said. Emma, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. She took a step back from me, shaking her head. No, this isn't real. You wouldn't do this to me. You're my sister. You wouldn't. I did, I said. And I don't expect you to forgive me. I just couldn't keep lying to you. Not anymore. For a long moment, she just stared at me. And then, without a word, she turned and walked back toward the tent. I didn't follow her. I couldn't. I stood there by the lake alone, watching as my sister returned to her wedding reception to confront the man she had just married. What happened next? I only know from what I was told later. Emma walked straight to Daniel, took his arm, and pulled him away from the guests. They disappeared into a side room, and the door closed behind them. The guests noticed, of course. There was whispering, speculation. But the party continued because no one could have guessed what was unfolding in that room. 20 minutes later, Emma emerged, alone. Her face was pale, her eyes red, but her composure was intact. She walked to the center of the dance floor, and the music stopped. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, her voice steady despite everything. "But I need to make an announcement." The room went silent. Everyone was watching, waiting, sensing that something monumental was about to happen. "I've just learned something that has changed everything," Emma said. "And while I won't share the details tonight, I want you all to know that this marriage is over. It's over before it began." Gasps, whispers, confusion. Emma raised her hand for silence. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate what we thought was a beautiful love story. But love requires truth. And there was no truth here, only lies." She took off her wedding ring and set it on the table beside her. Then she looked at the crowd, her chin high, her eyes dry. "The party is over. Thank you for coming." And then she walked out, past the guests, past the flowers and the fairy lights and the champagne, out into the night. I wanted to go, knowing that I had caused this, that my sister's heart was breaking because of my choices. Daniel emerged from the side room minutes later, looking pale and shaken. He tried to salvage the situation, tried to explain, but the guests were already leaving. The beautiful wedding had become a scandal, and everyone wanted to escape before they became part of it. I left that night too. I drove home in my maid of honor dress, mascara smeared down my face, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I didn't stop crying until I reached my apartment, and even then, the tears just kept coming. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages from family, from friends, from people who had been at the wedding and wanted to know what had happened. I ignored them all. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't explain what I had done. Emma didn't call, didn't text. The silence from her was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Days passed, then weeks. I moved through my life like a zombie, going through the motions but feeling nothing. I lost weight because I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes, I saw my sister's face. And the moment she realized what I'd done, my parents called, demanding explanations. I told them the truth because I was done lying. My mother cried. My father couldn't even look at me. They didn't disown me, not officially, but the coldness in their voices made it clear that something had broken that could never be repaired. Daniel tried to contact me once. A text message, 3 weeks after the wedding. "We should talk." I deleted it without responding. He had nothing to say that I wanted to hear. He was just as guilty as I was, but he was also the man who had stood at the altar and promised forever to a woman he had betrayed the night before. He was a coward and a liar, and I wanted nothing to do with him. 2 months after the wedding, I finally heard from Emma. She showed up at my apartment on a Sunday morning, unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking thinner than I remembered, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside and let her pass. We sat in my living room on opposite ends of the couch with a chasm of silence between us. "I've been trying to understand," she said finally. "I've been trying to figure out why, how, what I did wrong." "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "This wasn't about you, it was about me." "Then explain it to me. Because I've run through every possibility in my head, and none of them make sense. You're my sister. You loved me. How could you do this?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer I didn't have. How could I explain the jealousy, the loneliness, the desperate hunger to be chosen? How could I make her understand that I had spent my whole life feeling invisible and Daniel had made me feel seen for the first time? But those weren't reasons. They were excuses. And Emma deserved better than excuses. "I was broken," I said. "I've been broken for a long time and I didn't even realize it. I was so jealous of you, Emma. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you were everything I wanted to be and wasn't. You were confident and beautiful and loved, and I was just There, in the background, watching. Emma stared at me, her expression unreadable. You think I didn't love you? You think I didn't see you? I know you did, but it wasn't enough. Something inside me needed more. Needed to be chosen over you just once. Needed to win. Win! Emma's voice cracked. This isn't a competition, Claire. This is family. This is everything. I know that now. I knew it then too. But the knowing wasn't enough to stop me. Nothing was enough to stop me. And I will regret that for the rest of my life. We sat in silence for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked, marking the seconds of our mutual pain. I'm filing for an annulment, Emma said finally. The marriage is being dissolved. It's like it never happened. Good,
Ya está
I
pasando.
said.
Sí.
You deserve better than him. Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. I deserved better than both of you. I nodded. There was nothing I could say to that. She was right. She stood up, smoothing her jacket. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Claire. I want to. You're still my sister, and some part of me still loves you, but every time I look at you, I see that night. I see everything I thought I knew crumbling around me. I understand, I said, and I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. No, she agreed. You don't. She walked to the door, and for a moment, I thought she would leave without looking back. But then she paused, her hand on the knob. I need time, she said. Maybe a lot of time. But if you're serious about this, fix it. Not for me, for you. And then she was gone. I took her advice. Not because I thought it would earn her forgiveness, but because she was right. I was broken, and I had been for a long time. The affair with Daniel was just the symptom of a much deeper sickness. I started therapy. I faced the insecurity and jealousy that had been festering inside me since childhood. I examined the patterns that had led me to make such destructive choices. It was painful work, slow and sometimes brutal. But it was necessary. I also started keeping a journal, writing down my thoughts and feelings, trying to make sense of who I was and who I wanted to become. I read books about betrayal and forgiveness, trying to understand both sides of the equation. I attended support groups for people who had hurt others and were trying to make amends. And I waited. Not for Emma to forgive me, but for myself to become someone worthy of forgiveness. Months passed, then a year, then two. I changed jobs, moved to a new city, tried to build a life that wasn't defined by my worst moment. It wasn't easy. The guilt was always there, a constant companion, reminding me of what I had done. But slowly, I began to heal. Not completely. I don't know if complete healing is possible after something like this, but enough to function. Enough to find moments of peace. I heard through our parents that Emma had started dating again. A lawyer, apparently. Someone kind and honest. Someone who had nothing to hide. Our mother said she seemed happy, and I was glad. Truly glad. Emma deserved happiness more than anyone I knew. I didn't try to contact her. I'd said what I needed to say, and the rest was up to her. If she ever wanted to rebuild our relationship, I would be there. But I wouldn't push. I had lost the right to push. 2.5 years after the wedding, I received a letter. It was handwritten in Emma's elegant script. The envelope was addressed to my new apartment, which meant she had gone to the trouble of tracking down my address. That alone told me something had changed. I opened the envelope with trembling hands and read her words. Dear Claire, I've spent a long time being angry at you. Longer than I probably needed to be. But anger is exhausting. And I've realized that holding on to it was hurting me more than it was hurting you. I'm not writing to say I forgive you. I don't know if I do or if I ever will. Forgiveness is complicated, and what you did left scars that may never fully heal. But I've done some healing of my own these past 2 years. I've built a new life, and it's a good one. I'm happy, or at least as happy as I know how to be. And I've come to realize that part of moving forward means letting go of the past. I don't hate you, Claire. I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I don't hate you. You're still my sister. And some part of me still loves you, despite everything. I'm not ready to see you, not yet. But I wanted you to know that I'm okay, that I survived. That what you did didn't destroy me, even though it felt like it would. Maybe someday we can try again. Maybe someday we can find a way to be sisters again. I don't know what that would look like, but I'm open to the possibility. Take care of yourself. Be better than you were. That's the only thing I ask. Emma. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something. A crack in the wall, a sliver of hope. I wrote back. A short letter, just a few paragraphs. I thanked her for reaching out. I told her about the work I had been doing on myself. I assured her that I wasn't asking for anything in return. I just wanted her to know that her letter meant more to me than she could possibly understand. I didn't expect a response, but 2 weeks later, another letter arrived. Shorter this time, but warmer. She asked about my new job, my new city, my new life. She shared a little about her own. We continued like that for months. Letters, not texts or phone calls. There was something about the formality of writing that made it easier, gave us both time to think before we spoke. The letters were careful, tentative, two people tiptoeing around a minefield of pain. But they were also hopeful. Each one a small step towards something neither of us could name. Last spring, Emma got engaged again. To the lawyer, the kind and honest one. She sent me a letter telling me about it, describing the proposal, the ring, her plans for the future. She sounded genuinely happy, and reading her words, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride? Pride in my sister for surviving what I had done to her. Pride in her resilience, her strength, her ability to trust again after I'd given her every reason not to. She didn't invite me to the wedding. I didn't expect her to, but she sent me a photograph afterward. Her in a simple white dress, standing beside a man who looked at her the way she deserved to be looked at. She was smiling, radiant, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. I have the photograph framed in my apartment now, a reminder of what I destroyed, but also of what survived. Emma and I are not close, not like we were before. I don't know if we ever will be. The trust between us was shattered, and some things once broken can never be fully repaired. But we talk now. Phone calls once a month or so. Careful conversations about nothing important. Just two sisters trying to find their way back to each other. It's not what we had, but it's something. And sometimes something is enough. I think about Daniel sometimes. I heard he moved away, started over somewhere else. I don't know if he ever found what he was looking for, and I don't really care. He was a symptom of my sickness, not the cause. Blaming him would be easy, but the truth is that I made my own choices. I walked into that room. I stayed. I let it happen. That's the hardest part of owning your mistakes. Accepting that no one forced you to do what you did, that the person who hurt the ones you loved most was you. I still carry the guilt. I suspect I always will. But I've learned to live with it the way you learn to live with a scar. It's part of me now, part of my story. And while I can't change what I did, I can control what I do next. I'm trying to be better. Every day, every choice, every interaction, I'm trying to be the person my sister always believed I was, even when I wasn't. I'm trying to earn the second chance I don't deserve. And maybe that's all any of us can do. Make our mistakes, face our consequences, and then wake up the next morning and try again. Not to erase the past, but to build a future that's worthy of it. This is my confession. The whole ugly truth, laid bare for anyone who cares to hear it. I cheated with my sister's fiancé the night before her wedding, and I live with that truth every single day. But I'm still here. Still trying. Still hoping that somewhere, on the other side of all this pain, there's a version of me that's worthy of love. And maybe, just maybe, a version of my sister who can love her again. The night before Emma's wedding, I made the worst decision of my life. But the day after, and every day since, I've been making different ones. Smaller ones. Quieter ones. The kind that don't make headlines or break hearts, but slowly, steadily add up to something like redemption. I don't know if I'll ever be redeemed. I don't know if I deserve to be.